Good morning, folks. We're here this morning in downtown Denver, Colorado. It's Jury Education Day. We're going to greet some people and tell them about the Fully Informed Jury Association here in Denver, because trials are important. It's also important for jurors to know their rights. The right to use their conscience instead of just following the word of the law. Our country was founded on the concepts of no representation, no taxation. Got it backwards, but it's still the same. Jurors are the representation of the people to make sure that our laws are being followed, and that the laws that we have are good laws, and that the prosecution of those laws is done in cases where it's justifiable. Jurors' role in a trial is to use their conscience to listen to the evidence presented and to ensure that the money being used by the government is appropriately focused on judging those who have committed real crimes against our society. So if you're here today as a representative of the people, we hope you'll come get a flyer. A little beat up because we haven't had jury trials for a year. But we would love to talk with you more. Never heard of the Fully Informed Jury Association, please go check out fija.org. Read some information for you all this morning. True or false? When you sit on a jury, you may vote on the verdict according to your conscience. True, you say, and you're right, but then, why do most judges tell you that you may consider only the facts, that you must not let your conscience, opinion of the law, or the motives of the defendant affect your decision? In a trial by jury, the judge's job is to referee the event and provide neutral legal advice to the jury, properly beginning with a full explanation of a juror's rights and responsibilities. But judges rarely fully inform jurors of their rights, especially their right to judge the law itself and vote on the verdict according to conscience. In fact, judges regularly assist the prosecution by dismissing prospective jurors who know these facts. In fact, judges regularly assist the prosecution by dismissing prospective jurors who will admit knowing about this right, beginning with anyone who also admits having qualms with the law. So if you're here this morning, folks, to serve on a jury, we want to thank you. It is the most honorable thing that we can ask of our voting citizens, to come down to the courthouse when they're summoned to serve on a prospective jury panel, to observe what the government is persecuting people for. Are we putting pedophiles and rapists, abusers in jail? Are we persecuting people who use their free speech to defend others? What is your tax dollars going for? Should you be here today persecuting people with those dollars? How can people get fair trials if the jurors are told they can't use their conscience? Many people don't get a fair trial. Jurors often end up apologizing to the person they've convicted or to the community for acquitting a defendant when the evidence of guilt seemed pretty clear. Something is definitely wrong when jurors feel apologetic about their verdict. They should never have to explain, "I wanted to use my conscience, but the judge made us take an oath to apply the law as given to us, like it or not." Too often, jurors who try to vote their consciences are talked out of it by other jurors. Didn't know what their rights were. Good morning, Devin.
Hi.
How you doing this morning, counselor?
Good, how are you?
I'm great. I hear we're back to jury trial.
Yeah.
Time to keep the education of the public happening. That's my former counselor for those of you watching live. State defenders, they're great. That's right, folks, if you're here as summoned for a jury trial, we've got flyers. We'd love to educate you about your rights.
Although I forgot some silly things in my bag, I was wondering, like, good night, and I get for me. No, don't touch that. Okay, hang on, I have one. Yeah, it's
So,
Thank you.
is there other people coming?
I'm not sure. I told most people to log in online. I don't. When I asked my attorney yesterday, she said
She lied to you. A jury trial cannot be
because of COVID.
No.
Okay, well, call Lex.
I'm running live, and
I'll text her.
but if there's the fact is they can't have a jury trial if they're doing a crime for public to come up.
Okay.
Like your attorney has to say that, and so once the trial is public, they're not going to have trial where it's public.
Right. And I guess they think because it's on Zoom, it's public enough.
I would argue against that.
Yeah. Okay.
I want a packed
I'll
jury.
talk to her. I know.
I want a packed jury. I want a packed box of vaccinated people. People outside the building. Yeah.
I know. That's
Yes.
what I was hoping for too. But okay, let me go ahead and talk to her if you like.
Let me just say that is because when I'm done for the hour, she need this. Fine.
Okay.
So I can leave these things stored with something nearby.
Sure.
It's gonna wait for you and hold with you to get the days to
I have my phone. Yeah. Are you sure? I parked kind of far away and it's cold. I kind of on one side. I'll just call you afterwards and I'll get them back at some point.
Do you never get in anywhere?
No, I have my.
For example?
Oh, that maybe I can take that. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
Good morning, world. How are we doing this morning? Love my little toy. Isn't that fun?
That is really fun.
I can broadcast all over this city now.
Let me run in.
Have fun. Good luck. Thank you. I still haven't seen the jury, which was really interesting to me. Right, we're looking for jurors, people who need to be educated this morning about their rights, the rights to be judged by your peers. Opening day happened a couple days ago with baseball. The courts are also opening up. For the last year, we have not been putting pedophiles and rapists on trial. And yet here, as we open up the courts, we're judging protesters. We're judging people who have used their voice speak out against the injustices of this world today. So, if you're coming downtown today, you're here because you've been handed a summons by your mailman for the postal service that says, come on down to the courthouse. We're going to do some prosecuting today. Some prosecuting today. Then you must know who and why and what you are as a juror. Because the juror is the most important person that walks these hallowed halls today. The juror is the reason that the United States of America was created. No taxation without representation. Representation today is holding your government accountable to the people that they are putting through the system. Are they offering a good representation of the use of our tax dollars? Folks, it's very important that you know that if you are here to serve on a jury today, the judge is not going to tell you about your rights that this country was founded on to represent. You, the juror, have a right to judge your government as well as the person sitting in trial. Is the law being applied in a just and fair way? Is it a good use of your taxpayer dollars? Are the people being persecuted the right ones? Are we having trials for rapists, for murderers, for physical and sexual abusers? Or are we putting people on trial for standing up for the rights of other human beings? As a juror summoned today, you have high honor and responsibility to use your conscience in the courtroom. You have the right to determine if your moral values align with the reason that you're in court today. When it's your turn to serve, please be aware that you may and should vote with your conscience. You cannot be forced to obey a juror's oath. You have the right to hang the jury with your vote if you cannot agree with other jurors. The Fully Informed Jury Association is a national educational nonprofit organization. We're here today to tell you, the citizens of the United States of America, more about your right, your power, and your duty as a juror. Because you're not likely to be told about these things in a court of law. We want to return to the days of old, where judges actually told the truth from the bench, where they gave the jurors all the power they were designed to have. In the early days of our nation and in colonial times, jurors knew their responsibility to use their conscience. If the judge didn't tell a person that they had the right to use their conscience, attorneys did. In our modern day, judges actually ban attorneys from telling the jury pool about their rights. The right to use your conscience, the right to deem whether the case should even be in a court of law, utilizing taxpayer dollars. If you're being accused of a crime and you want to be judged by a jury of your peers to determine if what you did whether the law against that behavior is a good law. That is also the job of a jury, to determine if the law is a good law or a bad law. Because we can't stand for bad laws. It's like bad police officers and bad politicians. They must be changed. Good morning. So folks, if you're here for jury service, we thank you for coming today to the most honorable activity that we could ask of you. The ability to sit in a courtroom, the ability to use an open and clear mind, the ability to use your conscience to determine if the accused committed a crime, if the crime should be punishable, if the law is just, and if your government is using your taxpayer dollars in an appropriate manner, persecuting cases that should be persecuted. Do you know that there are pedophiles and rapists waiting trial while people who did minor things, like stand outside in public using their voice to stand up for the rights of others, face jail time? Here in the state of Colorado, throughout the United States of America, today, people are going to court. People are standing up in a court of law, being accused of crimes that hurt nobody, of activities and lifestyle behaviors that may even be necessary for survival. By this, I clearly mean that maybe somebody's in court today that had to take a pee, and there were no toilets available for them to drain their bodily fluids in, because the government systems do not provide for the basic needs of their society. Does somebody belong in jail because their natural body function is required? Should somebody go to jail because the crime they're being accused of hurt nobody? Being a fully informed juror means that you know you have the right to use your conscience, whether the judge tells you so or not. Being a fully informed juror means that you know you have the right to judge the law as well as the accused. Being a fully informed juror means that you understand your rights to honor the Constitution and your conscience at the same time. In the city and county of Denver, in the state of Colorado, court is back on. It is time for the protests and the voices of the period we are calling COVID and George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter, to be heard. And we're so glad that you're out here today. If you're showing up with a little slip of paper that you're asked to come in and use your voice, please come in, use your mind. Thank you for being a voter who's educated, who's willing to serve on a jury. Thank you for being a human being that's willing to be participant in your government. The scales of justice are supposed to be balanced for the needs of the people. We're here today, folks, because the courts are opening back up. And after 1 year of closure, it's time for our society to start making decisions. Who are we persecuting and why? Are there victims? Is our society persecuting people for things that occurred that hurt nobody? That occurred because society was not established and set up to meet the needs of the human beings that walk in these doorways? Are we participating in a form of government that criminalizes humans for survival? Or that punishes those who commit atrocities that harm others? For 8 minutes and 46 seconds, George Floyd had a knee on his neck. Right now, in Minnesota, a jury is hearing all the facts, and they will vote with their conscience. Today in Denver, Colorado, someone's sitting in a jail cell because they're unhoused, because their brain's a little off, because life is stressful and the economy isn't back open for them. Are we persecuting them for sleeping on a sidewalk? For having a life struggle? Are we using our taxpayer dollars to persecute people who are just trying to survive? Or are we persecuting people who have committed an atrocity against our society at large? What is the point and the purpose of a jury trial if the jurors do not use their conscience? What is the point of a representative government if the governed do not hold their representatives accountable? As jurors, you have the ability to do both. To hold your government to account and to hold those who live within its confines to a standard. If you're coming to the courthouse this morning because you have been asked to serve, we have yellow sheets of paper over here. They tell you about jury rights and responsibilities. If you're being accused of a crime and you don't feel that you should be persecuted, you have the right to a representative trial. That trial, you're judged by your peers. Your peers have a right to use their conscience to determine whether the law is just, whether there's a victim. You have the right to this information. There's sheets over here. They're yellow ones. My name's Brian. I'm representing the Fully Informed Jury Association today. You have a right to be judged by your peers. Your peers have a right to use their conscience. You have a right to force the government to stop persecuting you. These are things we forget about, but it's so important that you know about. So if you're showing up this day because you've been summoned, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for being a voter here in the city and county of Denver. I want to thank you for being an educated person. If you're here on a jury summons, we have yellow sheets of paper over here. Things the judge will not tell you in the courtroom. Things like the fact that you have the right to use your conscience to, as a juror, to determine whether the law is just, whether there was actually a victim, whether the punishment is just. You have a right to ask yourself if taxpayer dollars should be utilized in such a manner. You have a right to hang a jury and say, get this case out of here. These people don't belong here. You have a right to use your conscience. And as a summoned juror, we thank you for exercising that right. You cannot understand how important you are today as a juror. Yes, folks, it was a normal procedure in the early days of our nation and in colonial times. If the judge didn't tell the jury about their rights, the defense attorney did. America's founders realized that trials by juries of ordinary citizens, fully informed of their powers as jurors, would confine the government to its proper role as a servant. Because if your government is not serving you, it is not a representative government, and you have a right to change that. So juries have the power to confine the government to its proper role as a servant, not the master of the people. Our third president, Thomas Jefferson, put it like this: I consider trial by jury as the only anchor yet imagined by a man, by which a government can be held to the principles of its Constitution. Let me repeat that. I consider trial by jury as the only anchor yet imagined by a human, by which a government can be held to the principles of the Constitution. Good morning. If you've been sent here to serve on a jury, we have flyers for you. Thank you. John Adams, our second president, had this to say about the juror. It is not only their right, but their duty to find the verdict according to their own best understanding, judgment, and conscience, though in direct opposition to the direction of the court. Are these experienced voices our past presidents, the people who helped found our nation, because people were being taken away overseas to court, where they had no representation, where their lives were being bound up in shackles? I would think so. I would think that the people who became president shortly after the founding of our nation were people who were experienced with the ideals of representative government. Many decades had passed between the founding of our nation and the principles of the juror being able to use their conscience in a court to judge their peers. Only decades had passed since freedom of the press was established in the colonies, when a jury decided John Peter Zenzinger was not guilty of seditious libel. He was charged with this crime for printing true but damaging news stories about the royal governor in the New York colony. And the facts are that what happened in colonial America is still important today. Good morning. If you're here to serve on a jury, I've got flyers over here for you. The reason we have these flyers is because the court does not always tell you what your rights are as a juror in a representative government. Being able to use your conscience in the case is key. Being able to judge both the law and the way it is being applied is a key aspect of why we have trial by jury. So if you're here today because your government has asked you as a voter to come sit on a case, I want to thank you for being willing to do that. I want to thank you for being a juror that uses their conscience. Are we putting pedophiles, rapists, murderers on trial? Are we putting people in jail who sleep on the sidewalk, who have to go to the bathroom, just don't have a bathroom to use? Are we putting people on trial who in 2020 use their voice to speak out against the oppression of others? Is that a good use of our taxpayer dollars? Is that a just role for our government today? If you are here to serve as a juror, it is your job to use your conscience to consider these things. If you're here as a defendant, you should know these rights of a jury as well. The judge doesn't always tell us that we have a right to use our conscience. In fact, most of the time the judge skips that part. They say you have to follow the letter of the law, but only the judge in a non-jury trial has to follow the letter of the law. If you're here to serve as a juror today, you have the most power of all. And I thank you for coming out here. I thank you for answering the call of the courts, of the people, of the governed to hold their government into account. If you're being charged with a crime, of course, you should be judged by your peers. You should have a jury trial. And you should make sure that your jurors also know that they have a right to use their conscience to determine if the law is a just law, if the application of law is as intended, and what the impacts of that are. Is the law written and designed to criminalize the poor or minorities? Is the law designed to uphold the power of the affluent? Is the law designed to criminalize people where there is no victim? They are, that's right. Good morning. Thank you, Counselor. I'm assuming.
No.
Oh, clerk?
No, I'm going to school.
Okay, well, make sure you have a jury trial. Make sure that your peers are called to judge you. That's right, folks. Your peers. Those people who vote, live, and work in the community that you do. Your peers who are called to come down and judge not only you, but the law, using their conscience as part of the process. For the last year, our courts have been closed due to COVID. There is a backlog of cases. Pedophiles, rapists, murderers, people who stood out on the sidewalks and the streets using their voice, saying we should stop watching people get murdered on live TV in the name of justice and the law, who are being persecuted now in favor of those who actually did victim crimes. So if you're here this morning to serve and answer the call of a juror, thank you. Thank you for being a voter. Thank you for coming and being willing to serve in the judicial process. Please be advised you have the right to use your conscience. You have the right to determine if the laws being written are persecuting unjustly. If the application of the law is as intended and appropriate. Are we here today to sit in judgment of those who peed on a tree? Or are we using the opening of the courts to persecute people who have committed catastrophic, inhumane acts against our society? Is it a good use of taxpayer dollars to put protesters on trial? To put them housed in jail for sleeping on the sidewalk? Is it appropriate for us to financially bind and enslave those who have limited resources? When you come to serve the jury pool, you come to use your conscience to judge both the law and the defendant. And we thank you for that. Good morning, live viewers. We're glad you're here today. We're going to stick around for a little bit longer this morning. What is the spraying sound? I don't hear a spraying sound. Is there an echo? Glad you're all here today. There doesn't seem to be a lot of people carrying white jury sheets into the building. It's an interesting concept. I am using a headset wired to a little box. It helps give me a little echo, little voice advantage. I'm also using the building to reflect these noises. Good morning, folks. Thank you for coming to court today. If you're here because you have a jury summons, we thank you for coming to do one of the most honorable things you could do today, and that's sit in a jury pool, judge your peers, determine if the laws that are being applied and those who are being persecuted deserve it. Is it just? Is it appropriate? Are we persecuting people for using their voice and standing out against people's necks being kneeled on? Are we here because victims need assistance? Or did somebody pee on a tree because there was no bathroom provided for them? When we serve on a jury, we get to use our conscience to determine whether the persecuted should be persecuted, whether there's a victim, whether the law is being applied justly. And with cases that have not been tried for over 12 months, we have to ask, what cases is the government choosing to persecute to put in its highest priority? And is that an appropriate use of our tax dollars? These are all important questions that we all must ask ourselves. We must all know why our taxpayer dollars are being used and if it's just. I do not know who has sentencing this morning in this courtroom. I do not know all of the people who have a jury trial scheduled today. But I know that on a regular and consistent basis, we have been failing to hold court for the last year. Now that the courts are opening again, we must evaluate who is going to trial. Are there victims involved? Are people using their constitutional rights and being persecuted for it? Was there a victim? Or are we just spending taxpayer dollars persecuting people where no actual crime was committed? As the courts open back up, we ask you folks to remember the role of a jury in the world today. A jury of our peers is why this country was founded. No taxation without representation. Our founding fathers and the first presidents of the United States had a lot to speak about the role of a juror and their responsibility to use their conscience in a court of law, to judge the government as well as the defendant. Please today remember your role in the courtroom. Remember that we all have a part to play in creating a world post-COVID that is more just than the one we locked ourselves in our houses beforehand. We have a responsibility to remember the names of George Floyd, of Elijah McClain, and the people who stood in the streets for the last year calling for justice. Why are these people being persecuted today? Why are these people facing jail time? Is that the right way to go as a society? Are we supposed to punish those who have less by financially enslaving them in a system that binds them because they're poor? If you had to sleep on a sidewalk because you didn't have a house, should you go to jail for it? What if you had to use the bathroom, but the city you lived in didn't give bathrooms to anybody? They didn't make them publicly available. So every time you had to go pee, you risked going to jail. Every time you had to go to sleep at night, you risked getting raped because you had to sleep next to a dumpster and not under a camera. Because the shelters are not safe. And neither are our streets. What would happen if only judges had the ability to determine who was guilty? If only judges had the capacity to observe the government, its application of law, and the level in which people are being persecuted under it. Juries have a role in our society. It's a very important role. It's a role that observes the government as well as the citizens. The role of a jury to hold the government accountable is so important. In determining why George Floyd died, jurors are currently listening to all kinds of information. Were the peace officers properly trained? Did they have adequate information to do their jobs? So as Derek Chauvin trial goes on, jurors are sitting in judgment of both the government and the defendant. The use of taxpayer dollars in their case, many people will feel is justified. But when we put somebody who's been standing out in the streets on trial because they stood and used their voice as constitutionally protected, it is the role of a jury to use their conscience and determine if the application of law and the application of persecution of that law is just. Are we putting rapists and murderers on trial after our court's been closed for a year? Or are we putting people who peed on a tree and stood in the street and judging them? Which is a better use of your taxpayer dollars, folks? Good morning. So if you're here today to serve on a jury, we thank you. If you're here to demand a jury to judge you, we thank you. And if you're here as a government representative of the judicial process, we'll remind you, everybody will be held accountable. In 2019, the courts were found to be allowing the Public Defender's Office to violate state law. That's right. In 2019, we found the courts and the Public Defender's Office violating state law. So we want to remind everybody that the people are watching. And when you're here serving as a juror, your job is to judge your government as well as the defendant. Your job is to hold all in high account and standard. Is there a victim? Is the taxpayer dollar being used appropriately to persecute somebody? Are we charging people who stood out in the streets with the role of being put on trial first before our rapists and our murderers, our abusers? Who's going on trial today, folks? Whose cases are we presiding over? Are there victims involved? If there's not victims involved, should we even be holding those trials right now? Should we be holding those cases in priority? It's your role as a juror to decide that. As representatives of the legal system, it is your job to value which cases should actually be persecuted and which cases over the last year, while the courts have been closed, should go away. Folks, I cannot express enough as we come back into this society of courts and judges and jury selection, that we remember why we do these things, who we're holding accountable, the point of holding people into account. All of this is key and important. So if you're here this morning to serve on a jury trial, we thank you. We want to remind you that your role today is important. The judge may not tell you that you have the right to use your conscience, but our country was founded on this concept of no taxation without representation. It is the voice of the people sitting in the jury box that judges both the law, the accused, and the government, which cases they choose to prosecute, which cases are of high import to our communities. Are we here putting people who peed on trees or stood in the streets on trial? Are we focusing on pedophiles, murderers, rapists? Whose cases are going before the court today? If you're here to serve as a juror, we thank you. Thank you for being a voter in the city and county of Denver. Thank you for showing up with an open mind, the agreement to use your conscience in a court of law to judge the accused and the government. Are there victims involved? Good morning. How you doing this morning?
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Yeah, we're live. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you all for coming to court today. Thank you for participating in this process. Thank you for helping to uplift our government and hold them accountable. We are all accountability partners. partners in this process. We must know whether the people who are coming in these doors today should be persecuted or their victims. Why are we here today? It's been a year since COVID shut our courts down. What are our courts choosing as high priority cases? Are we telling people who saw George Floyd murdered on live television that this is a new world and we must accept it? Or are we putting people on trial today that committed murder, that committed an atrocity against another human being in physical, real violence? These are important questions. And when we serve on a jury, when we're working inside the courts, we must remember that all of these factors are key. So again, I cannot express this enough. If you are here today to serve as a juror, thank you. I personally am grateful for your presence today. I am grateful for those who vote, who understand the Constitution of the United States of America and its role in our representative government. We cannot be represented effectively if we do not hold our government into account. If you are here for a jury trial today, please remember that you have the right to use your conscience when sitting in the box. If you are the accused, you have the right for a jury of your peers to judge you. Your peers have the right to use their conscience to determine if there was a victim involved, if the use of taxpayer dollars in persecuting you is just, if there was actually a crime committed. Is it a crime to use your voice when you watch people being murdered on TV? When people have to sleep on the streets, pee on trees because there's not a toilet available to them? What kind of world do we live in? We live in a world where the jury is still important. Where the human is the representation of their government, and when they sit in a jury box, their conscience is the representation of society. When we open these courts back up, we have to ask, what did we do over the last year? Are we putting people in front of courts, in front of juries that committed crimes against our society, against other human beings? Were they just using their voice? Were they standing outside on a sidewalk or in the street saying, we should stop killing people in the name of the law? It's a real question, folks. You need to answer it. You need to ask it. And if you're watching live on this channel this morning, you need to come out and join me. That's right. You too need to come out and ask these questions, answer these questions, and speak the truth. You need to know, here in Denver, Colorado, at the Lindsay Flanagan Courthouse, what are we doing today? Basic questions. That's right. So for all of you that are here, Boss Mayor, Linda Land, Himi Namus, Raj, Not says Onyx, Unknown, Noel, Armerson, Citizen Not. I'm glad you're all here. I'm glad you hung out for a while. We're going to end our jury education this morning with a reminder. You too can stop forest fires.
Have a great day, everybody. Thanks.